Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and a super warm welcome to Elif Shafak, who is the author of the month this month. We read Rivers in the Sky for the month of September, and I've been reading the reviews from our book club meetings, and it was really, really well loved by so many of the members. So that's no surprise, of course, because you're such an incredible author. We actually read one of your books, gosh, it was a long time ago now, like maybe over 5 years ago at least. I should have looked it up actually. But I'm going to read a short bio before I let you take us on a journey. Let me just grab it here. So, Elif Shafak is an award-winning British-Turkish novelist and storyteller. She's published 21 books, 13 of which are novels, and her books have been translated into, drum roll please, 58 languages, which is outstanding. Shafak holds a PhD in political science, and she has taught at various universities in Turkey, the US, and the UK, including St. Anne's College, Oxford University, where she's an honorary fellow. She also holds an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Bard College. Shafak is a fellow and vice president of the Royal Society of Literature and has been chosen among BBC's 100 most inspiring and influential women. An advocate for women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, and freedom of expression, Shafak is an inspiring public speaker and twice TED Global speaker. She has won so many awards for her writing that I couldn't possibly mention all of them, but we're absolutely thrilled and honored to have her with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for, your generous words. I am very excited to join you.
So the way that it works is we really do welcome anybody on the call to ask a question live if you'd like. But you can also pop your questions into the chat window if you have a question for Leaf, and I will make sure it gets asked. But I also have a bunch of questions that were emailed to me, especially given the time on the East Coast. We do have most of our members are from Canada and America, so the time difference for those that it was challenging for actually sent me emails with questions. So I am so prepared for this. But to start us off, why don't you just give us a little intro into specifically this book?
Yeah, absolutely, with pleasure. So the way I see it, uh, this is a novel that focuses on the lives of three individuals who might seem to be very, very different at first glance. They live in different parts of the world, different historical eras, but they are connected in a surprising way, hopefully. And then two rivers, which are the river Thames and the river Tigris in the Middle East, and one ancient poem, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So three, two, one, and everything is connected via a tiny single drop of water. So if I may say this, maybe it looks like an epic novel, epic in the sense that it does journey across cultures, centuries, even millennia, continents. So the canvas of the novel is quite broad and multi-layered. But this is not how the story came to me. Actually, it started with something very, very tiny, and that was a single raindrop, which one day landed on my hand as I was walking by the river Thames. And I was looking at this raindrop, and I thought, can I tell its story? I didn't want to take that droplet for granted, even something as small and seemingly as insignificant as a drop of water. And I say this as an author who comes from a part of the world where we are experiencing severe water shortage. So water scarcity in the Middle East is not a hypothetical, theoretical, abstract question. It is an acute reality. Today, of the most 10 water-stressed nations in the world, 7 of them are in the Middle East and in North Africa, which means that our rivers are dying, our rivers are drying up. And of course, this affects everything. It has massive consequences from, social, economic, political. We also see an increase in violence wherever there's water shortage. So it affects literally everything. But I think it is women and children and the poor who carry this burden in a disproportionate way. And also, I find it important that in many traditional communities, women, usually young women, are water carriers. So they fetch water, they bring water to their communities. When there's no drinkable water nearby, the distance that a young woman has to walk increases, unfortunately, increasing the possibility for gender violence. And the reason I say this, mention this, is because in our minds, sometimes we put all these issues in separate boxes. Like if you care about climate, there's another box for that. If we care about water shortage, there's another drawer for that. Or if we care about women's rights, etc., there's another box for that. But in life, there are no boxes, there are no drawers. And water, even a drop of water, reminds us that everything is connected and we are all deeply, deeply connected, especially in an age like this. We're connected with each other as fellow human beings beyond borders, beyond frontiers, but equally we are connected with nature. We're not above nature, we're not outside of nature. Actually, we human beings, we're only a tiny part of a very delicate and vulnerable ecosystem. So I think it was those connections that guided me as I was writing this novel, but everything started with that tiny little droplet.
How poetic, even in your explanation and like everything. I mean, your books are so beautifully and so eloquent that I feel like it really causes the reader to think about what they're reading and they're enjoying the story so much, but at the same time, they're learning so much, which is such a gift that you have to be able to do that.
I so appreciate this. And I think, when I look at the era we're living in, particularly the arts, particularly literature, we're not being encouraged to perhaps transcend or try to go beyond our comfort zones. I mean, the very first thing that often is said to students or members of creative writing workshops is write what you know, right? Which is valuable advice, but it's very, very limited and limiting if we think that we can only write what we know, because that is interpreted as I should only write about my story. And again, literature is such a vast terrain. There is room in it, there's space in it for different styles, for different paths. So writing about our own story, please don't get me wrong, is so valuable, and I have a lot of respect for that. But my point is, literature is bigger than that. It's vaster than that. And so we don't allow ourselves to say, write what you feel. The heart is always broader than identity. Because as human beings, we have a capacity for building connections. We have an ability towards empathy. So those are the connections that are not encouraged enough. And the other thing that I think is not encouraged much is interdisciplinary thinking, novels of ideas. The novel as a genre, and I love it so much, I always associate it with freedom, holds so much nuance in it, holds so much multiplicity in it, unlike social media. So actually, a novel is the right place to discuss even the most sensitive and difficult issues, not discuss in a way that the author is above and trying to teach something or preach something. I don't like that. I find that very off-putting. But discuss in the sense that we care about questions. We care about silences. So you open up a space of nuance, multiplicity, and try to ask these difficult questions. But then as an author, you have to take a step back and always leave the answers to the reader. Why? Because every reader is going to come up with their own answers. And I have to respect that. No two readings are ever the same. I think each reading is unique, like our fingerprints. So there's a part of me that, as an author, very much appreciates interdisciplinary thinking, the kind of novels that try to bridge written culture and oral culture. I'm very attached to the Western traditions of novel, the canon, particularly European novel, American novels. But that is not the only tradition that I'm connected with. I'm also attached to the storytelling traditions of the Balkans, the Middle East, the Levant, which is different, which is a bit more cyclical, it's more circular. So I'm aware of that too. Maybe I carry it with me, within me. So all I'm trying to say is I like the kind of novels that try to build bridges, not because of some intellectual idea, but because that comes organically to me. It comes naturally to me.
It's just a comment there. Um, I would like to know, so just going back to what you said about writing about what you know, and I don't know if it's new or if it's been always been happening, but there's a lot of authors that come under fire for cultural appropriation because they're benefiting from a story that's perhaps not theirs to tell. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, and I take this question very seriously. I think it's good that we're talking about it. And maybe there isn't a single simple answer.
No.
So let's keep talking. Let's keep thinking. There's no harm in that. I think it's very important to be aware of glass walls existing within the publishing world. Many minority authors do not get an equal chance,
Yeah.
and we need to be aware of those glass walls. So let's amplify the voices, the stories of those who have been pushed to the periphery. There's immense value in that. Equally, many authors who come from, let's say, the non-Western world, they're not given, we are not given maybe an equal chance at artistic creativity. What do
Mhm.
I mean by that? For instance, if you happen to be an Afghan woman writer, you are expected almost always to write about the problems of women in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Please don't get me wrong. It is so important to write about the issues that women in Afghanistan are going through. Immensely important to amplify those stories. But my objection is an Afghan woman writer might equally write sci-fi,
Hmm.
climate fiction,
Yep.
avant-garde fiction. Maybe in one of her books, she's going to write about women in Afghanistan, but the next book is going to be about something completely different. We don't allow her to move in that direction because we put her in a box. So we should be, of course, aware of all these boxes and glass walls. But as we are doing this, at the same time, simultaneously, we can encourage heart-to-heart connections.
Yeah.
If you feel it in your heart, if you are genuinely connected, because if you're not genuinely connected, you cannot write. I mean, writing a novel is really hard work.
Yeah.
It requires something more than just an idea. It really requires passion. It really requires empathy. It requires a genuine connection that is much more emotional than intellectual. So if you have that connection, with, for instance, the land where I come from, can you not have Turkish characters in your book?
Mhm.
Of course you can. I mean, Tolstoy wrote one of the most unforgettable female characters in literary history. So did Gustave Flaubert. He created Madame Bovary.
Mhm.
If we only put people in boxes, then we have to say a male author cannot write about the female experience, but they did. So there is something in art and literature that really allows us to transcend those boxes of identity. And I think we can encourage that. We must encourage that. At the same time, be aware of the hierarchies, inequalities, and glass walls within our societies and the publishing industry. We can do all of those things at the same time.
Well said, bravo. Going back to the idea of the water, which um, in the river, there are rivers in the sky. Water becomes a kind of memory keeper, connecting three lives across time and space. How did you specifically choose two rivers, the Tigris and the Thames, as characters in the story, and what did they allow you to say about loss, belonging, and resistance?
Yeah, beautiful question. I often don't know whether writers choose their subjects or our subjects choose us. I really don't know how much of this is rational choice. But all I know is these two rivers, they're the ones that have shaped my life,
Mm.
and they've been important in my own journey. Of course, I come from Turkey, a country that has a very long history, rich history, but that doesn't necessarily translate into strong memory. If anything, it's quite the opposite. And I think in Turkey, we're a society of collective amnesia. There's a lot of amnesia, and our relationship with the past is full of ruptures. When there is a void, it's very easy to fill in that void with ultra nationalistic, ultra religious, imperial nostalgia that says we were a great empire, everything we did was amazing. But then you ask, as an author, what about the stories of women? Because the history that's taught to us is mostly his story, meaning the story of a few men in positions of power and authority. But where are the stories of women? What was the Ottoman Empire like for maybe a peasant woman who had no access to power, or a concubine in the harem who was not necessarily the favorite of the sultan? What was life like for her? Or a prostitute, in Istanbul. How did she experience that time in the past? Huge silence. Equally, what was life like for minorities, for Christian, Jewish minorities, for ethnic minorities? Again, massive silence. So all I'm saying is, to be a storyteller, I think requires to also pay attention to silences, not only to stories. So as I focused on these two rivers, the Thames and the Tigris, I think I try to also understand the kind of memory that water holds, or this idea of water memory. The Thames has always also been very important for me, not only the Tigris. I'm an immigrant in the UK. I've moved here about 17 years ago now. As you can hear in my accent, I'm not a native speaker in English. So I think I feel like I'm a double immigrant in the sense that not only in the UK, but also in the English language, in the language I write in. Um, I've written my first novels in Turkish, but then I switched to English about 20 years ago. So it's a complicated existence as an immigrant, it's a fractured existence. You gain a lot, you learn a lot. There's an immense richness to it, but there's a melancholy as well. There's a sense of loss. And in my books, I'm very interested in the dialectical relationship between maybe melancholy and humor, you know can they dance, or faith and doubt, can they talk? I like to try to maybe bridge seeming opposites.
I got this question emailed to me. There is a question from Monique, but I'm going to ask it in a little bit, just while we stay on the subject of the actual book we read this month. So the question was, Arthur's life in Victorian London begins in poverty and is shaped by memory and books. How did you balance historical research, especially about London and, I'm going to say this wrong, Assyriology, with imaginative storytelling so Arthur feels real rather than archival?
Beautiful, thank you so much. um, this character was so important for me. In a way, he was like my oxygen. As you know, these three characters, they're like connected to each other like atoms in a water molecule, like the H2O, and he was the center for me. I fell in love with this character as I kept writing and imagining him. I need to tell you, of course, right away that he's loosely based on an actual historical figure called George Smith. So a man like that actually lived. But of course, my character is completely fictional, imaginary. I had to dream up a childhood for him. I had to dream up a youth for him because we don't know much about his own childhood. What we do know about this person is that he was born into severe poverty. He's not given any proper education. I have a feeling that had he been alive today, we would have respected the neurodivergence of his mind, recognized the beauty of his mind, but at the time, of course, he gets no such recognition. And he's a very, you know, forsaken character in that sense. He's treated as the other. And so for a young boy like that to come to the British Museum, which at the time is very hierarchical, and to purely by coincidence to find these broken, shattered clay tablets, and with the power of his visual memory to start piecing them together little by little is just mind-blowing. We're talking about thousands and thousands of broken tablets, which at the time almost no one can read. Only a few people here and there are beginning to decode it, but this boy has no knowledge, has no prior knowledge. So he's the one who decoded the flood tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is a major discovery because the story that he finds is very close to Noah's Ark in the Bible, except this one was written thousands of years before the Old Testament. So when he comes up with this discovery, when he decodes this poem, literally not only Victorian society in England, but across Europe and also in America, people are divided. There are those who say, well, you see, it proves that the Holy Book is right, that this really happened in history. But then there are those who say, who are more science oriented, and they were saying actually what it proves is that as human beings, we have been telling ourselves the same old stories over and over across millennia. And this very timid, introverted man, he finds himself in the middle of a very heated debate between science and religion. He comes to the Middle East, he loses his life there, and today he's buried between Syria and Turkey in a forgotten graveyard. So I think a part of me wanted to honor this extraordinary mind. And your question is about the research that I've done. To be honest, that part was a little bit insane. I had to do a lot of research for this book. Out of respect for my subject, I wanted to understand, absorb, process everything. Not only written culture, maybe we'll talk about the Yazidis later on. So, because that's a culture that's mostly based on oral
Yeah.
storytelling. So I had to do a lot of research into oral storytelling as well, not only written books. And then there comes a moment when, as an author, you feel like, okay, I can fly now, now I can take off. And from that moment onwards, you only follow your intuition. There's no logic, there's no rational analysis, all of that you leave behind. And it's your characters that guide you, and you obey that flow. So I love that stage. It's a very freeing stage, but until I'm ready for that, I really think a lot, research a lot, and take lots of notes.
Well, it certainly shows. Yeah, the next question is about the Yazidi identity. So, Naren's storyline is linked to the Yazidi identity and contemporary violence. How did you approach incorporating real traumatic history respectfully while still making space for hope and agency?
Yeah, I so appreciate it. Uh, I mean, it was very difficult to write some of the chapters in this book, and of these, many are related to the story, to the stories of the Yazidi communities. As you know, we're talking about one of the most misunderstood, maligned, attacked, and persecuted minorities in the Middle East. Throughout centuries, they've been called all kinds of horrific names, slandered, called quote unquote devil worshippers by people who have no idea about this old ancient culture. And the Yazidi lore talks about 72 massacres, in a way, holds the memory of 72 massacres date by date across history. And the 73rd one, of course, happened in front of the eyes of the world when ISIS fanatics launched their genocidal attacks against very vulnerable communities. But maybe not many people noticed at the time that the very first thing that the extremists did was to kill the water. So they poisoned the wells, they poisoned the fountains, leaving no drinkable water for entire communities. And then the second thing they did, very deliberately, I believe, was to kill the elderly. Because in a community like the Yazidis, where identity is transmitted via memory, yeah, if you kill the elderly, you're killing collective memory. If you kill collective memory, you kill collective identity.
Hmm.
So all of that goes hand in hand. And then they killed defenseless men, and they kidnapped women and children. As we're speaking, 10 years later, more than 10 years, there's still thousands of women missing, unfortunately treated as sex slaves. And purely by coincidence, while I was writing this novel, one of these women was saved from a house in Ankara in the neighborhood where I grew up, my maternal grandmother's house. And I was doing a lot of research at the time. It really struck me hard because how is it possible that a human being is kept under these circumstances in a very tight-knit community, and the neighbors don't see, the neighbors don't know, or they don't talk about it. So there's a numbness, there's an indifference, and I think that's a big part of the problem. There's a dehumanization. I hope and I always believe that literature has an ability to reverse that in a way, to rehumanize people who have been systematically dehumanized, or to make their stories a bit more visible. So for me, it was very important to try to approach this very delicate subject with utmost care, and I collected lots of testimonies, survivors' testimonies, interviewed human rights activists, interviewed therapists who have been trying to help Yazidi women heal individually and collectively. All of that was also part of the research.
Wow. Okay, so there's a question here from Lisa, who's on the call now. She said, the book was so rich and beautiful. My chapter all agreed that we learned so much and deeply appreciated. Thank you. Her two questions are, one, your author's note listed such an extensive body of research. It was like the intellectual work of a PhD. And on top of that huge feat, you also wrote a beautiful work of fiction that was thoughtful, thought-provoking and educational and emotionally moving. Can you speak to your knowledge of your and other historical fiction writers' research processes? Is this common? I'm newer to the genre.
Yeah, I really appreciate. I mean, for me, I'm very interested in literary fiction. Some of my books are a bit more contemporary. For instance, one of my earlier novels is called 10 Minutes, 38 Seconds in the Strange World, which tells the story of a sex worker in Istanbul. It has a very unusual structure. We know right away the character is dead, but her mind is still working for another few minutes. And so as she remembers her past, we journey into her story. The reason I mention this is because some of my work is very contemporary, some of my work is more historical, and I love, in a way, commuting between time zones, geographical zones, because the novel as a genre is so open to this, and that's the beauty of it, because when we read about someone's story, we leave our own little corners of the universe for a few hours, for a few days. We journey into someone else's existence. I've always believed that that's a very humbling exercise for the mind and for the soul. So I'm giving you a long answer, but my point is I'm interested in the art of storytelling. Wherever the story takes me, if it takes me towards history, I go in that direction. If it takes me into a modern context, I go in that direction, or a futuristic one, I'll go in that direction. But it's always the art of storytelling that is my guide. The issue is whatever we write about, I think we have to give it our best, which is not only an intellectual effort. Of course, we do a lot of research, a lot of thinking, but it has to be an emotional connection. There has to be an empathy. I love that word, which is unfortunately discarded in today's world. Empathy, particularly the Germanic origin of the word, is very important. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is not pity. It doesn't mean looking at someone from above and feeling pity for them. In its origin, from the German language, it's like einfühlen. You journey into something else. That journey is very important for me. And wherever the story takes me, I want to journey in that direction as well. So all I can say is emotional intelligence is a big part of, I think, the art of storytelling. Not only research, not only knowledge, but allowing our emotions to connect with someone else's existence. We live in a world in which emotions are regarded as a sign of weakness. And this is very problematic because we're living in the age of angst. Right now, everybody is so anxious. The only difference, I really think people are anxious right now, young and old, East and West. The only difference is some people are more accustomed, more used to hiding their emotions than other people. That's the only difference. So underneath, there's a lot of anxiety. And I think it's healthier to be able to talk about emotions, whether it's anxiety, anger, frustration, depression, confusion. All of that is very, very human. And actually, these are sources of raw energy, you know. The issue is what do we do with these emotions, not whether we are feeling these emotions. Of course, we're feeling them. But the question is, can we turn it into something more positive? There's only one emotion that really scares me, and that's the lack of all emotions, which is apathy. The moment we stop caring, the moment we stop connecting. I think that kind of numbness is a much more dangerous world. So I would like to hope that literature is the antidote to numbness.
She one and I don't know. I would love to hear the answer for this, but what other books would you recommend that bring similar kind of questions and learnings and feelings that this book brought?
Thank you. Some of the books that have really guided me, I have tried to mention at the end of the novel, in a way as a like a note to the reader, like a little letter to the reader. But I think what really matters for me is to make the act of reading constant, continuous in our lives. And I think it's always more nourishing for the mind when we are ready to leave our comfort zones. So, for instance, when a novelist becomes interested in neuroscience, or water science. I don't know anything about these fields, but I'm ready to learn. So I become a student of that field. Or when a scientist falls in love with poetry, or when a poet becomes interested in philosophy, or when a philosopher is drawn to film theory, right? Or a director is interested in visual arts. Those are the moments when we leave our comfort zones and journey into another discipline and become the student of that discipline. So, all I'm trying to say is, I think we have to keep our reading lists eclectic. They need to be hybrid, they need to be interdisciplinary, intercultural. Let's read anything and everything that speaks to us. Nothing is superior, nothing is inferior. Let's read political philosophy, but let's also read cookbooks. I love cookbooks, they're fascinating. They're so important to understand a culture. Let's read graphic novels. They're fantastic. So let's read across the board, but let's definitely read fiction because I think fiction brings us closer to truth in a very different way. It's very unfortunate that in the English language we use the word fiction as if it were the opposite of fact, like an escape world that has nothing to do with reality. That is not fiction. Fiction actually is very interested in the truth and it brings us closer to truth in its own way. So I think everyone right now is in need of connecting with their own emotional intelligence, whether we are dentists, designers, politicians, students. I feel sad when people say, I don't have time for fiction, as if it's not important. They read politics, they read economy, they read about technology. Inside fiction, there is politics, there is psychology, there is technology. Many of these technological advances that we're talking about right now were written about 150 years ago by novelists who envisioned this kind of world. So fiction is very interested in multiple disciplines, but most importantly, it's interested in life. And so I think there's immense value in connecting the mind and the heart and understanding the importance of emotional intelligence in a way that only fiction can tell.
I've never heard it described that way, but it's so true. Monique, sorry, thank you very much, Lisa, for your question. That was great. Monique, I'm going to just flip your question a little bit, but she says, was this book emotionally exhausting to write? And if so, how did you manage that?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was exhausting to be honest. There were times when I felt physically unwell, emotionally very overwhelmed. But I experience this a lot. Every time I write a novel, somehow it affects my mood, my emotions. Um, so I can't claim that I'm not affected. But what I can tell you is there's something stronger, there's something deeper that helps me keep writing. And that is my love for the art of storytelling. That is so deep, and it came to me when I was a child. The desire to become a novelist, to become a published writer, all of that came to me much later. But the need for books was much, much early. Um, I was an only child raised by a single working mom, and I thought life was very boring, to be honest. And it was books that showed me there were other worlds, other possibilities, and I could connect with those worlds through stories. So I always associate the art of storytelling with freedom, with multiplicity, with this transcendental journey, and and love. I think that love is much stronger for me, despite the exhaustion. Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit away from the book and talk about your life and craft. So you've written or you write in both Turkish and English, and I wonder how language shapes your creative process. Are there ideas or sensations that feel more natural in one language? And if so, how do you negotiate between them?
Yeah, this is a question that I find very, very important. I care about language a lot, and I do not see language like an instrument, a fork, a knife that I can use and then put aside. I think language is a space. We enter into that space, we inhale it, we breathe it in, and it shapes us in so many ways. I do not write fiction in Turkish anymore. So about 20 years, if not more actually, I switched completely. My first four novels were written in Turkish. Ever since then, I've written every single book in English. And what happens is once it's translated into Turkish, and I'm very grateful to the amazing translators I work with, particularly one translator I've been working with for a long time. She allows me in a way to play with her manuscript, to play around, and I kind of rewrite in the sense that I love using old words in Turkish. I like inverted sentences. I play. But of course, the most of the work is done by her in terms of translating. So all I'm trying to say is the creative process for me is primarily now after 20 years in the English language. And that said, I'm always interested in how we can dream in more than one language because the mind does not recognize these borders. Sometimes in a dream, you can start a dream in German and finish it in Korean. The mind just jumps. I've always believed that if you can dream in more than one language, we can write fiction in more than one language. Of course, Turkish is my mother tongue, and I'm very attached, emotionally very attached to this language, and I love it dearly. But I'm also intellectually very attached to the English language, which has become my home. And it has given me an additional space of freedom. To be honest, to be a novelist in Turkey or from Turkish background is a heavy experience. When you're a female novelist, it's even heavier. You have to deal with additional layers of misogyny and patriarchy. Some of it is subtle, some of it it's more visible. Um, the way you're reviewed, the way you're treated will be completely different as a female novelist. So all of that I've experienced, but I've also experienced how whatever you write, from politics to sexuality to gender to history, you will offend someone. You will offend the authorities, and you can get into trouble just like that overnight. You will be put in on trial. You can be prosecuted, investigated, called a traitor, betrayer, digitally almost lynched, and so on. I've experienced all of these things. So somehow writing in English gives me maybe a cognitive distance, some additional space. It's like when you want to see a painting more closely, you don't necessarily go into the painting, you take a step back. And that gives you another perspective. Writing in English gave me another cognitive distance, another, space. I needed that. Maybe a sense of freedom. I needed that too. And in a paradoxical way, perhaps it brought me closer to the land that I come from, or it gave me a chance to take a closer look. That said, to this day, there are things that I find much easier to write in English. There are things that I find much easier to write in Turkish. So melancholy is still easier to express in Turkish. Longing, I can write these things much easily in Turkish. But when it comes to humor, which I really, really adore, I love humor. I think humor is our oxygen. I'm not talking about bitter, condescending, cold humor, but I'm talking about compassionate humor. It keeps us sane. So when it comes to humor, irony, satire, I really find these things much easier to express in English.
Very interesting. We have another question here. Saliha says she admires your passion and dedication to storytelling as you continue to write through the exhaustion and struggle. How do you rebuild your strength physically and mentally after?
Yeah, really, really appreciate this question. And I think it's a question that we all ask ourselves, right? In an age like this, in which we are exhausted, every day so much is happening. I think this is the age of hyper information, fast consumption. It's an age in which we have way too much information, let alone misinformation. But the truth is, all these morsels of information that keep falling on us, we don't have time to process them. There's no way. Our brains are not wired in this way. We cannot process thousands and thousands of snippets of information per day. So there's way too much information, but very little knowledge and even less wisdom. That's the age we're living in, and we have to change this ratio. We have to turn it upside down. We need to spend less time with snippets of information, more time with knowledge, and hopefully even more time with wisdom. When I say knowledge, knowledge cannot be rushed. It's not something that we can rush in any way. So we have to slow down for knowledge. Knowledge requires books, lengthy conversations, cultural spaces, podcasts. I think podcasts are wonderful. Slow journalism, literary festivals. What you are doing right now, you kindly invited me. We listen to each other. We really don't need to agree about everything, but we have time for each other, right? This is very precious. And then for wisdom, I think we have to bring the heart into the conversation, because wisdom requires something beyond logic, rationality, and intellect. It requires emotional intelligence. So if we can put more emphasis on knowledge and wisdom instead of information, it will help to reduce our anxiety. That said, there are days for me when I feel almost like even getting out of bed is a struggle. And that's also human. We can't be on top of our game every day. We can't be expected. It is so misleading, the images that are imposed on us on Instagram, social media, these perfect lives, everything polished, all smiles. That is not true. Everybody is struggling. That is the truth, right? So how can we have more honest conversations also about our mental health struggles, just so that we can see we are not alone? I think that's very important.
Thank you. Next question. Your work has often explored themes of exile, displacement, memory, and multiple belongings. As someone who's lived across cultures, how do those experiences continue to evolve in your personal life, and how do they influence which stories you feel compelled to tell next?
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, these are all concepts that mean a lot to me, like home. Where is home? Can we have multiple homes? Can home be something portable? Can a homeland be something portable? Do we carry our motherlands wherever we go? All of these questions matter to me. What is exile? What is the life of an immigrant or an exile? I care about these questions a lot, and I try to explore them in my work because there isn't a single simple answer. So of course, a part of me feels like when I left Istanbul so many years ago, I left a part of me there, and I really feel that sense of loss. At the same time, I also genuinely believe that identity is not a solid, static block. We don't have to think of identity in those terms. We can think of identity as ripples in water. And there were philosophers, particularly ancient Greek philosophers, who thought of belonging in these terms, but we lost touch with them because of the age we're living in, because it's such a polarized age that tells us you're either in this box or that box, and you have to stay there once and for all. It doesn't have to be like that. So when I look at myself, for instance, of course, I am, as I mentioned, Turkish. Big Istanbul is a big part of my work, and I feel very attached to this city. I will carry it with me, all the time. But equally, I feel attached to the Balkans. I feel like I have elements in my soul from the Middle East that I will carry with me. Equally, I feel European by birth, the values that I share. Over the years, I have become British. I feel attached to this country. And despite what politicians have been telling us in the UK, because they said during these Brexit debates, we were told that if you're a citizen of the world, it means you're a citizen of nowhere. And I fully disagree with that. You can be a citizen of the world. It doesn't mean that you're just floating in the air without a care. It means that you're also connected to humanity, to one single human race. So why can't we have multiple circles of belonging? It's very natural and actually a beautiful thing for any of us to feel a strong attachment to the land where we come from, to our ancestral heritage. But it's a lie to think that as we're doing this, we cannot at the same time feel connected to humanity. Why shouldn't we? We don't have to think in those dualistic terms. So I think a part of me is very interested in multiple belongings.
Do you still travel back to Turkey?
I don't go back to Turkey. It's been a long time. I feel very attached to the people, particularly, you know, the culture, the history, the music, the food. I feel very attached to the women, youth, minorities. So it's not like when you're outside miles and continents away, you forget it. You do not forget. But when I look at its politics and politicians, I find it very, very depressing,
Mm,
very demoralizing, and it's very difficult because it's particularly for writers, because as an author, you need freedom of speech
yeah.
to be able to imagine your stories. So in many ways, democracy has been broken in Turkey, but it's not the only country. I mean, when I look at what's happening in America, when I look at what's happening across Europe, there is no such thing as, some countries being solid and other countries being liquid. We used to think like that in late 1990s, early 2000s. But I think fast forward, we have entered an age in which there is no such thing as solid countries versus liquid countries. We're all going through liquid times, which means that countries can go backward. And if that happens, it will affect women's rights. It will affect minority rights. So we all need to think about democracy. We all need to think about coexistence, diversity, our shared humanity, not only this country or that country. So I'm giving you a long answer, but I do feel emotionally, of course, attached to the people, and I love the people, and I feel more optimistic when I think about the people. When I think about the politics, I feel more pessimistic.
I wonder if you feel celebrated by the Turkish people because there's nowhere near enough Turkish authors. Um, and so I wonder if you still get that from.
It's interesting, in countries like Turkey, a book, of course, not many people read, but those who read can read passionately, and that's incredibly important. And the book is not necessarily a personal item that you read and then you put back on your shelf. Usually, if people like a book, they pass it on. So a reader shares it with her aunt, and
Mm.
the aunt shares it with her neighbors, and the neighbor sends it to her son, who might be in a different city. I have seen my books underlined by different colored pens because on average 5 to 6 people have read the same copy. So there's a word of mouth, there's a sharing, and that is incredibly precious.
Yeah.
I love that, I cherish that, and I appreciate that. But while you're going through that, as I mentioned earlier, you can, as an author, you can be put in a very difficult situation. Just one sentence can be plucked
Yeah.
out of your manuscript. For instance, when I wrote The Bastard of Istanbul, the words of fictional characters were taken out of the book and used as evidence in the courtroom. That's a book that talks about a Turkish family and an Armenian American family, and it talks about the Armenian genocide. And for this, I was put on trial, and the prosecutor asked for 3 years in prison. So that was a very unsettling, also very surreal experience because my lawyer had to defend the words of fictional characters.
Wow.
That lasted for more than a year, and then I was acquitted, and in a way, the fictional characters were acquitted. Just to give you one example, and I can give you other examples in which there were investigations, this time for quote unquote crime of obscenity, because I write about issues like gender violence, femicides, child brides, which in my opinion means child abuse, and these things are happening. So the moment you write, again, you can be targeted. So I don't want to give you a very lengthy response, but what I'm trying to say is it's a very mixed experience.
Sure.
You can be, to be a Turkish novelist, it feels like you're being kissed on one cheek and slapped on the other cheek at the same time, and it leaves you, yeah, a little bit bewildered. It is a complicated experience.
So two more questions from the audience. Renee would like to know, you discuss organ harvesting in the novel. To the best of your knowledge, are enslaved women still subjected to this horrible practice?
Yes, this is an issue that unfortunately does not get much coverage about. I haven't seen too many articles about this, but in the works of human rights organizations who have been focusing on this tragedy by evaluating cases, what happened to different women, different children. I have come across this repeatedly. It is horrific. And again, purely by coincidence, while I was writing this book, a Nigerian couple, I mentioned this at the end of the novel. I don't want to give too much away. A very rich Nigerian couple have been accused of, in a way, finding a poor person and bringing them through illegal ways to help their own relatives. So it's very complicated, but of course it's either usually the poor, poor people who don't have any means of defending themselves, or sometimes feel hopeless and have to sell their organs, or it is those who have been trafficked that are subjected to this network. And it's still going on, it's still happening. I don't see much journalistic reportage coverage about this. Unfortunately, it is still going on.
And Monique wanted to know, what are some of your favorite fictional English language authors?
There really are so many. I'm a curious writer, and sometimes I can read a novel for completely different reasons, in the sense that sometimes you immediately buy a novel because you love the author. And sometimes you're interested in the subject. Other times it's the language, the rhythm that speaks to you. So, as I said, I don't believe in this distinction between highbrow literature, lowbrow literature. Who makes those distinctions? I don't buy that. Whatever speaks to me in that moment in time is the right book for me. But just to keep the curiosity alive, let's not only read one genre over and over, but let's open it up. Yeah, that to me feels important. I read a lot of novels. both perhaps classical and contemporary. I think those ghosts, the ghosts of olden times, it could be Charles Dickens, it could be Virginia Woolf, it could be Walt Whitman. They're alive, you know. As long as their words are alive, they're with us. So they matter. But equally, I read a lot of poetry. Poetry is a very big challenge for an immigrant. It's the last frontier, you know. We always struggle with poetry a little bit because it's a matter of rhythm, not only understanding, but hearing the rhythm. I love poetry. I try to hear it in my heart. I also read short stories, maybe a bit less than novels, and nonfiction as well. So it's the eclectic reading list that I try to keep alive.
Whoa, sorry. We've just got a whole bunch of questions now. We're gonna wrap it up, so we're just gonna ask one or two more. But how long did it take you to write this novel, this last novel?
It it really took me a long time to do the research. So that's why I can never clearly answer this question because I don't know when we start. I know when I finish writing a novel because I know the date I handed to my editor. But when did I really start? Because it's almost like there's a part of your brain that starts thinking, accumulating, making those observations. For instance, one of my earlier novels is called The Island of Missing Trees.
Mm.
I always wanted to write about Cyprus. It's a divided island, as you might know. There's a frontier that cuts the island along ethnic and religious lines, in the sense that, on the one hand, you have majority Muslim population versus majority Christian population. You have Turkish Greeks, you have versus Greek, uh, sorry, Turkish Cypriots versus Greek Cypriots. And depending on whom you talk to, there are clashing memories. So it's a very difficult, very delicate subject. The wounds are not healed. And I wanted to mention this because I've been wanting to write about this story for a long time. But until I found the voice of a fig tree, I couldn't actually start writing. Uh, you see what I mean? So you don't know the beginning. A part of you is thinking, researching, trying to find a gateway into the story, and you can't. You keep feeling. And then there comes a moment when a voice, it's always important to get the voice right. And once you hear that voice, you have to take a risk. As an author, it is a risk to have a tree speak in the middle of a novel. You know, I wish you had seen my agent's face when I told him I'm going to write a novel and there's going to be a tree in it, and then the tree is going to talk. It's a huge risk because if it doesn't work, the whole thing collapses. But I really heard this voice inside my heart, and I believed in it, and I just wanted to go for it. So you never know when you exactly begin. You only know when you finish a novel.
Natalie wrote a very lovely comment for you that I'll let you read after we're finished. The last
I read
question I have for you is if you're working on something else that we can know about or look forward to.
Thank you. I've recently started the new novel. You know, when I'm at the beginning of a story, I don't quite know what I'm doing. I'm a little bit drunk when I'm, you know, just beginning. I don't walk a linear straight line. I always say to myself, this time I'm going to make it a simple linear story. But it never works like that because of who I am, you know, of how stories come to me. And I'm ready to just, as I said, follow that flow. So I want to write about creativity in a time of chaos. How is it possible to believe in the art of storytelling when the world feels so broken and fractured? That's the question that has been on my mind for a long time.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. You're such a bright light and in the world of literature, and we can't wait to see what comes next.
I'm so grateful for your time, your questions. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Very grateful.
And I would encourage everybody to read the back list as well, because I mean everything Elif has written is truly wonderful, as you can imagine from There Are Rivers in the Sky. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.